So today's theme, the title for today's sermon, I'm calling More Than Enough. More Than Enough. I happen to think that sometimes people think that God runs on empty. Have you ever run out of gas before? Or maybe the oil in your car got low and your little oil light pops on like you need to put oil in the car? I think sometimes people think that God runs on empty. I think God wants us to take ownership of the power that we have in God. The power that we have in God. God is not limited in any way, shape, or form. I often think that you and I think in very limited modes of thought, because there's always a beginning and the end with our thinking. With God, there is no beginning. There is no end. When we were overseas, we found out pretty quickly that even in a very nice hotel, there was not enough hot water to go around. I can remember when we were adopting Matt and Rebecca, that right in the middle of the kids' bath, the water went cold. And that was pretty shocking to I'm sure we're used to cold in where they used to live, but coming from a 3 or 4 star hotel, you certainly don't expect the water to go cold. Have you ever been out and about and your cell phone stopped operating? The cell towers were too far apart, or now you're saying, "Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?" And sometimes I think that we think that God doesn't know who we are or where we are. In our home, and in many homes that live in the woods, we have a quota on our download and our upload on our internet, because we have to have a dish to operate our internet. So when we go over our quota, which has happened before, they cut us back to dial-up speed. And if that's like on the 20th of the month when they cut us back because certain young people are watching too many YouTube videos or playing certain online games, then our quota is cut, and we go to dial up, and then mom and dad get very testy for the next 10 days, from the 20th to the end of the month, until our quota starts over again the following month. God does not have limitations on what he can do for us. People's desire sometimes to do right can be short-sighted. Have you ever gone through certain places in your life and life is running really good, and you're loving God and life is grand, but when life starts kind of buckling a little bit, you're not so excited about serving God anymore because things aren't going the way you think? Turn, if you will, over to Philippians chapter 1. I was able to uncover a truth in Philippians chapter 1. Where I want to invest some time here today. Philippians chapter 1, verse number 19. Philippians 1, verse 19. I want to read it first from the New American Standard, starting actually in verse 19, and then we're going to widen it up to starting in verse 12. So let's start up in verse 19 first. It says, "For I know that this shall turn to my salvation through your prayer and the supply of the Spirit of Jesus Christ." Now, that is great and it's wonderful, but let's kind of broaden what he's talking about. Philippians 1, starting in verse 12. "Now I want you to know, brethren, that my circumstances have turned out for the greater progress of the gospel, so that my imprisonment is the cause of Christ and has become well known throughout the whole Praetorium Guard and everyone else, and that most of the brethren, trusting in the Lord because of my imprisonment, have far more courage to speak the word of God without fear." Verse 15. "Some, to be sure, are preaching Christ, even from envy and strife, but some also from God's will. The latter do it out of love, knowing that I am appointed for the defense of the gospel. The former proclaim Christ out of selfish ambition, rather than from pure motives, thinking to cause me distress in my imprisonment. What then? Only that in every way, whether in pretense or in truth, Christ is proclaimed. In this I rejoice. Yes, I will rejoice, for I know that this will turn out for my deliverance through your prayers and provision of the Spirit of Jesus Christ." Verse 20. "According to my earnest expectation and hope, that I will not be put to shame in anything, but that with all boldness Christ will even now, as always, be exalted in my body, whether by life or by death. We're sharing some thoughts today on the supply of God, on the limitless supply that God has for us. The Darby translation in verse 19 says, "For I know that this shall turn out for me to my salvation through your supplication and the supply of the Spirit of Jesus Christ." The complete Jewish Bible says this in verse 19, "For I know that this will work out for my deliverance because of your prayers and support I get from the Spirit of Yeshua the Messiah." Now recently, my dad gave me an early birthday gift, and it was called Sparkling Gems from the Greek by Rick Renner. And it's a very, very interesting book because when I study scriptures, I like to know what's behind that text. You know, not only the words that were used, but the context of the contents of the context, if you make sense. Because I can say this or I can say that, but unless you know why I'm saying it, or to whom I'm speaking it to, or the surrounding, as we've been taught here, the paragraph of that actual thought, then we're really not getting the whole structure of the text. So this author, Rick Renner, said of this verse, Philippians verse 19, "Could it be that this person has learned how to tap into the supernatural source of power," he says. "Well, the same inexhaustible supply of power is available to you." Again, he quotes Philippians 1:19. "For I know that this shall turn my salvation through your prayer and the supply of the Spirit of Jesus Christ." Now, for those who don't know, a large part of the scriptures, especially in the New Testament, were written in Greek. And the Greek language is way deeper than our English. So he goes on to say, he says, "I especially want you to pay attention to the word supply in this verse." He says, it is the Greek word, and I tried to say it all day yesterday. I want to try to say it again. It doesn't matter what it is, but I just want to try it, just for fun. You ready? Epicorego. Epicorregio. E-P-I-C-O-R-E-G-E-O. Epicorregio. I'm not going to try to say that again, but I'll just say the Greek word. Okay, the Greek word refers to a story. In fact, it literally means on behalf of the choir. You say, "What are you talking about, John?" Hang in there. The author says, thousands of years ago in classical Greece, a huge choral and dramatic company practiced over and over for an important performance. They worked on it forever. They put in a great amount of time, effort, energy, and practice, and it was finally time for the show to go on the road, but there was one major problem. They ran out of money. Anybody been in there in your lifetime? You ran out of money. Oh, yeah. These people had given their lives to this production. They had planned all these resources and making sure this thing worked really well, but without financing, the whole thing fell apart. They were washed up before the show even got started. From all appearances, the author said, that it was the end of the road for them and their dream. But at that moment when they were at the end of their road, the story says, a wealthy man heard of their crisis, stepped into the middle of their issue, and made a huge financial contribution on behalf of the choir. Remember the Greek word, on behalf of the choir. This contribution supplied all they needed to get back in business again. In fact, the gift, it was so enormous that it was more than they needed or could spend. This man's contribution was excessively large, abundant, overflowing, and overwhelming. So can you see what he was talking about back in that same verse again? In fact, if you rephrase it just a little bit and insert that kind of Greek words in there, it says, I am certain that this situation, this is Paul speaking, Philippians 1:19, I am certain that this situation will ultimately turn around and result in my deliverance. I'm sure of it. First, because you are praying for me, and second, because of the special contribution of the Spirit that Jesus Christ is donating for my present cause. Now that I think is really interesting to me, because when we tap into, when we acknowledge at least, the limitless resources that God has for us, then we tend to think bigger than we think smaller. When we believe that God is the supplier, then we think more than we think less. Have you ever gone through stuff in your life when you think that there was a limited supply of something? When Tammy works on the pool, she is our pool help. We pay her a lot of money to make sure the pool keeps going. I mean, she makes really good income in our household. Of course, that's not true, but anyway, she is the one who takes responsibility for our pool. But we're on a well, and we have a pump to pump the water from underground to get the water in. So she is very, very, very astute on making sure how long that water runs. One time she was going to the hospital, and she told me before she left, now remember, at such and such a time, turn off the water. Because I know, because I have an office at the house, and I have to, juggle all that. Anyway, she says, at certain time, turn off the water, because if not, it could burn up the pump or drain everything dry. I said, okay, no problem, I got it. So she texted me an hour and a half after I was supposed to turn the water off, and didn't turn off the water, so I run outside. Happened again. This time she told Tim, because she trusts Tim more than me, I guess, my son, which makes sense. And Tammy texted me and said, did Tim turn off the water so we don't run the place dry and burn up the motor and all that stuff? And Tim goes, already handled. Already did it. Wow. Already did it. Tim's on the ball. Maybe because he got less on his mind, I have no idea. But let's just say that in the future, I happen to think that Tim's going to be getting that instruction to turn it off in a certain time instead of husband. And let me go back to this paraphrase of Philippians 1:19. I am certain that this situation will ultimately turn around and result in my deliverance. I'm sure of it because you are praying for me, and second, because of the special contribution of the Spirit that Jesus Christ is donating for my present cause. The Spirit of God is always giving us resources, whether or not we choose to tap into those resources or not. The great R.W. Shambach said often, when the devil starts messing, God starts blessing. Again, when the devil starts messing, God starts blessing.